Welcome to the largest invasion of human history. Operation Barbarossa was the invasion of the Soviet Union by Nazi Germany on June 22, 1941. It began with huge victories for Germany and disaster after disaster for Russia. The operation culminated in the Battle of Moscow, the grand finale, which Germany failed to take Moscow before the end of the year and foreshadowed Germany's eventual defeat. The incomprehensible amount of death and destruction caused in these 5 months of warfare is summed up by this quote from Joseph Stalin: "The death of one man is a tragedy, and the death of millions is a statistic." To give you an idea of how large this operation was, more than 15 million soldiers participated in this operation, and there were over 6 million casualties, including dead, wounded, missing, and captured. It is important to remember that even though the majority of soldiers in these casualties were captured, most captured soldiers in this war between Soviet Union and Nazi Germany had a minimal chance of survival. Soviet prisoners of war were starved by the German command, and German prisoners of war were forced to march to places like Siberia, where very few of them returned to Germany alive after the war. To Hitler, the war between Nazism and communism was inevitable. It was going to be a racial war of life and death in what he liked to call a war against Judeo-Bolshevism. He believed the war would be a rapid success, taking no more than 3 months. From what he saw in the Winter War between Finland and Russia, Hitler stated that we only have to kick in the door, and the whole rotten structure will come crashing down. On the Soviet side, Stalin believed that the Soviet Union could easily defend against the German invasion. As of 1941, the Soviet Union had a population of just under 200 million, whereas Germany had a population of just over 70 million. If all able-bodied men were sent into combat, Russia will have an army almost triple the size of Germany. Stalin also reasonably concluded that Hitler probably didn't want a two-front war against Britain on the west and Russia in the east. We don't know whether or not Stalin had plans to invade Germany if Hitler hadn't struck first. Interestingly enough, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Peace Pact, signed between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union, actually led to many cases of cooperation between the two competing ideologies. When Hitler invaded Poland, Stalin did his part and invaded the eastern part of Poland. The two nations also traded many resources between each other. After losing the Battle of Britain, Hitler turned his attention east. Ever since July 1940, the German High Command has been working on an invasion plan of the Soviet Union. Napoleon's failed invasion of Russia was extensively studied. Hitler believed that destroying the Red Army was more important than gaining territory, and did not care as much about taking Moscow. Many German generals believed that taking Moscow would be the decisive factor in this war. Hitler also believed the objectives of Barbarossa would be achieved before the winter, and therefore no winter preparations were made. This would be a grave mistake later on. Troop preparations began in late 1940. Over 3 million German troops were secretly moved to the eastern border. The operation was set to begin on May 15th, but delayed to June 22nd. Approximately 150 German divisions were assembled on the front, forming 3 army groups, 3,350 tanks, 7,200 artillery pieces, 2,770 aircrafts, 600,000 motor vehicles, and about 700,000 horses. Finland prepared 14 divisions and Romania prepared 13 divisions. A total of 3.8 million Axis personnel were gathered for the initial invasion. The Great Purge of the late 1930s, orchestrated by Stalin, eradicated a huge portion of the Red Army's military leadership. 15 out of 16 army commanders, 50 out of 37 corps commanders, 154 out of 180 divisional commanders were killed. The result of this devastation would be revealed in the disastrous Winter War, where the numerically and technologically superior Red Army was pushed to the verge of collapse against the significantly weaker Finnish army. Despite these self-sabotages, the Red Army grew considerably in size from 1939 to 1941 when 161 new divisions were formed. Stalin understood the risk of an invasion and made significant preparations. On the day of the invasion, the Red Army had 171 divisions stationed at the front, totaling just under 3 million men, with a total of 5.5 million men mobilized for combat in the Soviet Union. The Red Army also had a reserve force of over 14 million who received basic military training. The Soviets had a whopping 23,000 tanks in service, with 11,000 tanks on the front lines. The Soviets also had 20,000 aircrafts in service, with about 9,000 deployed on the front. The Red Army had so many military material that Hitler himself said, "If I had known about the Russian tank strength in 1941, I would not have attacked." Here's a secret recording of Hitler talking with Mannerheim about the Soviet tank forces and how surprised they were. I'll put a link to the full video down in the description below.
Wenn jemand gesagt hätte, dass ein Staat mit 35.000 Tanks antreten kann, dann hätte ich gesagt, sie sind wahnsinnig geworden. 35.000 Panzer. Wir haben zurzeit über 34.000 Panzer vernichtet. Wenn mir das jemand gesagt hätte, ich hätte gesagt, wenn ein General von mir erklärt hätte, dass hier ein Staat 35.000 Panzer in dieser Ziele hat, Sie sehen alles doppelt oder zehnfach. Das ist Wahnsinn, Sie sehen Gespenster. Das haben wir nicht für möglich. Wir haben Fabriken gefunden, allein eine da in Barbarossa zum Beispiel.
Despite the Soviets' numerical superiority in equipment, they had very poor logistics and troop training, which neglected their numerical advantages and resulted in huge losses in the early parts of Barbarossa. On the day of the invasion, Soviet forces were still being assembled on the front. Despite many warnings, Stalin and the Soviet High Command were completely caught off guard by the invasion. Let's take a look at the map. This is what the front lines looked like on the eve of the invasion. First, we have Army Group North, commanded by Field Marshal Wilhelm von Lieb. This army group is composed of the 16th, 18th Army with Panzer Group 4. Army Group Center is commanded by Field Marshal Fedor von Bock, composing of the 4th and 9th Army, along with Panzer Group 2 and 3. Army Group South is commanded by Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, composing of the 6th, 17th, and 11th Army, along with Panzer Group 1, the Romanian 3rd Army, and the Romanian 4th Army. There were two additional Axis elements, the Finnish Army and the Army of Norway. The Finns technically fought their own war with the support of Germany in the war called the Continuation War. Therefore, I won't be covering them. The Army of Norway fought on the far north and did not make a significant contribution to the campaign, so I will leave them aside. One disadvantage for Germany and her allies is that they had a very small reserve force. Again, Hitler expected a swift victory and planned to end the war in 3 to 4 months, so he saw no need for a reserve force. The Luftwaffe provided 3 main air armies. Air Army 1 supported Army Group North, Air Army 2, the largest of the 3, supported Army Group Center, and Air Army 4 supported Army Group South. On the Soviet side, the Northwestern Front, commanded by General Fyodor Isodorovich Kuznetsov, which includes the 8th, 11th, and 27th Army. The Western Front, commanded by General Dmitry Grigorovich Pavlov, composing of the 3rd, 4th, and 10th Army. The Southwestern Front, commanded by General Mikhail Karpanos, composing of the 5th, 6th, 12th, and 26th Army. And lastly, the Southern Front, commanded by General Ivan Turlanev, composing of the 9th Army and some other forward troops. We also have the Northern Front, commanded by General Markian Popov. However, they mainly engaged in the Arctic region with the Finnish Army and the Army of Norway, so I will leave them aside for a possible future video series. The Red Army had a huge reserve force. They were quickly mobilized after the first weeks of Barbarossa, and their numbers absolutely shocked the German High Command. The Red Army also had a huge air army, but they were terribly organized, and thousands of Soviet aircrafts were destroyed in the first few days of Barbarossa from German bombings. Since Germany had complete air superiority for the first month of combat, I'm not going to talk about the Soviet air army for now. Now let's examine the strategic objectives of each army group. The first objective of Army Group North was to march through the Baltic states and occupy Leningrad to the north. The second objective is to secure the north flank of Army Group Center as it's pushing towards Moscow. The objective of Army Group Center was to do a direct strike through Belarus into Minsk, Smolensk, and finally taking Moscow, the capital of Russia. Army Group South is ordered to move through Ukraine and up to the Volga River, destroying any Soviet units they encounter and support the southern flank of Army Group Center. In the next video, I will talk about the first phase of Operation Barbarossa, going from June 22nd to July 3rd. This phase will include some of the largest battles of human history, like the Battle of Bialystok-Minsk, where the entire western front of the Red Army will be trapped in a pocket and liquidated, with over 400,000 Soviet casualties in a single battle.